First of all, when I first met Meir Kahane, it was the early 70s. I mean, I go way back with him. I used to be 6'5", but in those years I sort of shrunk a little bit. Because of him, I wear a kippah today. I was as secular as can be. But I always identified as a Jew. And his magic was, if you went to a rally in Israel, people wearing a kippah, people not wearing a kippah, people wearing anything. But he struck a chord, because in every Jew there's a little bit of Asian there that has to be brought to the surface. And a lot of secular people had that. They had this Zionism within them that they knew had to be realized. And he brought these people together. Why do I bring up the Holocaust? Because I'm asked many times, many years ago when I made speeches at synagogues, people would say, well, explain Meir Kahane to me. And I would simply say this, as Rob Perry touched on it. That was a time when the Jews said, Shah, I don't want to make waves. I don't want to make this a Jewish war. Rabbi Kahane, unlike the Jewish leaders of that time, whom they even named synagogues after today, would have gone to Washington, D.C. at the height of the Holocaust. He would have brought 1 million Jews with him. He would have shut down that city until the American government did what they should have done. Bomb the camps, bomb the railroad tracks, do everything in their power to save Jews. He would have shut down the city. He had such a complete faith in who he was and what the Torah stood for that it ruled his life. The Holocaust defined him. Torah was his way of life. And he was so unafraid to say who he was. He had no fear. He had such faith in God that what's supposed to be will be. And I have so many stories that I really have to compartmentalize it, because I could go on forever, which I won't. But just to prove a point about Meir Kahane and how his Torah knowledge befuddled everybody in Israel, here's a story. When he was a member of the Knesset, they dedicated that year to Maimonides. Because the Knesset does that every year. They dedicate it to some tzaddik. So upon hearing that, Rabbi Kahane gets up and he says to the full Knesset, he says, I want to introduce 2 bills. One, a Jew can't marry an Arab. And 2, an Arab can't own a Jewish land. So Shlomo Hillel was the Speaker of the Knesset at the time, takes his gavel, he boom, smashes it down. Racist, 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 you can't do this. How dare you? We're not even consider this bill. So Kahane says, it's the year of Maimonides, right? He says, yeah. He said, well, all I did was read what Maimonides said. He says, if you think that's racist, then you think Judaism is racism. And in fact, that's how they eventually deposed him. Because in a country like Israel, it's more Middle East than Jewish many times. So they got the Supreme Court to pass a law saying that Rabbi Kahane was racist because of his views on Arabs. And he was kicked out of the Knesset. He was something else. At the height of his, for lack of a better word, power, we used to have huge banquets in this city. We used to get huge crowds. And I remember how I used to hold up his Knesset badge as an MC of the banquet saying, this is your badge. You have a man who speaks for you in the Knesset. He wasn't without a sense of humor either. I remember once he was in Oakland, or Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley. I think he was going to debate, who was that congressman, anti-Semitic, pardon me? No, but he was going to debate some guy.
Yeah.
So there were, it's pretty diverse down in that part of the woods. So he's about to go into the hall to debate people, and there were a group of lesbians on the corner with a big sign saying, "Lesbians against Kahane." And they thrust a mic in front of his face, and the guy says, "Well, what do you think about that?" He says, "I'd worry if it said lesbians for Kahane." But you take a look at a person like me, and he used to stay at my house. I wasn't kosher, wasn't religious, but he saw the Aish in every Jew. He saw that a Jew has that something in him that can be brought forth. And his biggest legacy, bar none, is how many thousands of people he brought back to Judaism. That was his legacy. Thousands converted. Not converted, became Baal Tshuva. I can't explain to you the fear of the secular community in Israel of Rabbi Kahane. But it's incredible that we're here 20 years after his death talking about him because he's relevant. And one of the greatest days I ever had in Israel, Rabbi Blockett is Israel now, I brought my family to Israel on a huge vacation. And the highlight of the trip for me was walking to Rabbi Kahane's brother's shul in the old city. Nachman Kahane is a man who's steeped in Torah as much as his brother was. After the 67 war, he walked through the Arab Shuk. He saw an area where a mezuzah was pulled out of the wall, and he says, "That's where my synagogue is going to be." And that's where it is to this day. And on Shabbos, I walked with Rabbi Block to his shul. We davened, and after we sat down, started talking a little bit, but I wasn't going to say anything to him about, your brother used to stay at my house, and I knew Meir since 1973 or something like that. But prior to that Shabbos, I think the week before, there was a kid in the IDF who was identified with Kach, but he was a little unstable, and his parents begged the IDF, don't give him a gun because we don't know what the hell he's going to do with it. And he did something. He went off into a Druze village and went and killed 4 people. So, of course, the papers jumped out of it. The Kahanes did this, the Kahanes did that. And all of a sudden, Nachman, his brother, turned to me and he says, "You know something? He's so in their psyche that they, every day, and you live in Israel, practically every day, they write an article about Meir Kahane, or somebody identified with Meir Kahane, or something that happened with a Kahanes and all that, because he's so in their psyche. He was so correct with his vision of what Israel should be and will be that it scared the hell out of them, because they don't have that view. But it's changing. A man who openly says that he was a student of Rav Kahane, who himself is a rabbi, but also an academician, he's a professor, is now a member of the Knesset. And he openly espouses Rabbi Kahane's views. That could never have happened years ago. They would have thrown him in jail. So I just want you to know that as lightly and superficially as we touch on who Meir Kahane was, try and read about him. Get more to know about him, because he was Torah through and through. And one personal note, this is how he helped me 17 years after his death. I lost my wife about 3 years ago. And in the depth of my sorrow, I picked up his book on the Torah. It just happened to fall out on the page called Emunah and Bitachon. And the most difficult thing in the world is Ira and Lou were finding out, because they just lost father and brother, standing at a graveside and saying Kaddish, praising God, saying everything God does is for the best. It's difficult to intellectualize after you've lost somebody you love. But I just happened to pick up that portion of his explanation of the Torah, and he put it this way. There are many beautiful trees. Some bear fruit, some don't. There are millions of people who have faith, believe in God, but very few have the trust of your convictions, that even if you lose someone as close as that to you, God is judge. That's how Meir Kahane lived, and that's how his legacy lives. Thank you.